All right, so let's start today with having a couple of you give me your definition of relapse. What do you think about when you think of relapse? What is that?
Returning to maladaptive behavior.
Returning to maladaptive behaviors. Anybody else? What is
Repetitive bad behavior.
repetitive bad behavior?
Ceasing to practice the principles of recovery.
Stopping to practice the principles of recovery?
Stopping what was working.
Stopping what was working.
Eloping into wrong knowledge.
Eloping into wrong knowledge. I love that.
Dysfunctional lifestyle.
Dysfunctional lifestyle. Now, the next question is, what absolutely has to happen before somebody can relapse?
Have to be in recovery.
You have to be in recovery before you can relapse. A lot of people that have gotten sent to me over the years for relapse prevention had never, ever totally got into recovery. So what does that look like? So for me, I look at these criteria that I'm looking for. Number one, does the person have an accurate, objective understanding of addiction as a neurobiologic brain disease? Not as a moral issue or a willpower issue, but it's a brain disease that impacts people biologically, psychologically, socially, and spiritually. Now, the next step is challenging because a lot of people get that, but no, that's not me, that's my dad, that's my brother, that's this person, that's that person. Especially with my pain patients. No, I have this herniated disc and a doctor's prescribing the meds. Who are you to say I'm addicted? No, gotta get to that understanding, gotta break through that resistance and denial. Then, a lot of people do that and they're hit with this overwhelming amount of shame, guilt, and remorse. So the next step is to accept those painful feelings about having this medical condition. And that's really challenging for a lot of people. Anybody in here ever gone through that? You know? Wow, bad one. Then the next step is having hope and belief that not only is recovery possible, but it's preferable to the way I've been going. I think people need that piece too. But that's not enough. That's still in the head. Now we need to get into action, doing the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual footwork that recovery requires. And if you miss any one of these four windows, your house can collapse. So you've got to be working in each of those areas. And then finally, the last criteria, important, but isn't enough by itself, is abstinence. So people hit 60 to 90 days and they move out of stabilization into early recovery if they've met all these other criteria. Does that make sense to people? Mm-hmm. So people cannot relapse until they meet this criteria. So let me explain it this way. Terry Gorski developmental model of recovery. It has different stages. Stage 0 is when the active abuse addiction, whether it's a process addiction, food, gambling, sex, or a chemical addiction, alcohol, other drugs, pain meds, whatever, that they're still in stage 0. People around them may know they have a problem. Like for me, before I got in recovery, people around me knew Steve had a problem. I didn't see it. Then at some point, we get knocked into the transition stage, then there's stabilization, early, middle, late, and ongoing. So one of my first tasks working with people is where are they in this continuum and what kind of assets and liabilities are they facing? So we want to do an in-depth assessment and then plan an approach that's going to meet the person where they're at. And I've got to be looking at my recovery when I do this too. So if people are still down here, this is where our denial management model fits in. You know, there's an old saying, you could lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink. The way Terry and I developed the denial management process, it makes the horse thirsty. It's a motivational, strength-based recovery approach. And we're going to be talking a lot about this morning. Now, to get people from transition to saying, oh, I better get a handle on this for a while till the pressure's off, into stabilization, resolving the denial that no, I need to keep going. They need some denial work, but now they need what we call primary recovery counseling, some primary tools. Craving management, stress management, post-acute withdrawal management, things like that. To move from stabilization to early recovery, They need some specific skills in that area, plus that's where the relapse prevention counseling. This afternoon, I'm going to give you a couple of the highlights of the relapse prevention counseling to help you develop your relapse intervention network and have a plan for handling warning signs in high-risk situations. So that's where we're going this afternoon. So a lot of the people in the Maximus diversion program, when you apply for transition, you need to get the relapse prevention therapy workbook and complete that and share that with your deck to have a good, solid relapse prevention plan in place. Now, a lot of us have coexisting problems that need to be concurrently dealt with. So at the same time, same place, same people. So that's the snapshot of what recovery is. So when people meet all those criteria and meet over here, now we better be focused on prevention, relapse prevention. And there's some strategic tools that I believe is crucial. The first one is identifying and managing stress. This is, I believe, the most important tool. Relaxation response skills, mindfulness meditation, yoga, whatever it takes, some kind of skills to keep your stress levels down. And one of the reasons for that is because stress can lead to cravings. So you need to have a strategic craving management plan. And some people need the new MAT, medication-assisted treatment. I don't think it should be a blanket intervention for everybody, but there are some people without some medication-assisted craving management aren't going to make it. Identifying and managing post-acute withdrawal, protracted or post-acute withdrawal. Terry's book, Staying Sober, the whole book's about that. Post-acute withdrawal, identification and management. It makes people become very dysfunctional in recovery. I believe that of all the people that relapse in the first year of recovery, at least half of them do so because they fail to recognize or manage protracted or post-acute withdrawal. They become very dysfunctional, cognitively, affectively, memory, sleep, coordination, stress sensitivity. All those areas get impacted for people. And then finally, managing high-risk situations. High-risk situations are also known as relapse justifications. Hey, I have a good excuse now. I have a good reason. Anybody in my situation would. That's the justification. Anybody ever hear any of those kind of thoughts in your head? You know, when I have a pain flare-up, there's still every once in a while that thought floats in. Oh, wouldn't it be nice? No. So the answer has to be that automatic. No, because you can't stop the thoughts from coming. That old program is still going to be there. It never goes away. So we need to have some tools to address it should it pop up. So this is the relapse cycle. You know, traditionally for years when I was teaching the relapse school with Terry, we always showed relapse as a slide, going down a slide. Then one year in Fort Lauderdale, we got thinking, wait a minute, it's a cycle. Let's change it up. So we, on a big poster paper, we did this. I sent it to Ellen, and then she put down made this PowerPoint slide for us. So the first step is when people meet that criteria and commit to stabilize. They commit to their recovery. They says, yes, I meet all those criteria. I know what addiction is. I've got it. I'm dealing with the shame, guilt, and remorse. I have hope and belief recovery is preferable and possible. I'm doing the biopsychosocial spiritual footwork, and now I'm abstinent. Every single person in recovery goes in and out of the relapse cycle all the time. And it always starts with some type of denial. But it doesn't have anything to do with your target problem, whether it's codependency, addiction, process, or chemical addiction. That doesn't happen until 9 o'clock. It usually starts with people stop doing what got them better in the first place. They stop growing. A good metaphor I like to use is the recovery process is like walking up a down escalator and having a mistaken belief it's okay to stop and I'll stay in place. I don't. I go down. So when people stop growing, guess what? That invites the inner saboteur to come in, and old self-defeating thinking, not addictive, but self-defeating thinking kicks in. My old thinking. And when my old thinking kicks in, that impacts my decision making. And so bad decisions usually lead to bad problems. And so when those bad problems kick in, it elevates my levels of stress, it exacerbates or turns on post-acute withdrawal, and I start feeling very crazy, dysfunctional. And to manage that, do you think I go back and use my Recovery 101 tools? No way. This is where I start using compulsive and impulsive behaviors. This is where cross addiction really kicks in, and especially the process addictions. I'll use food to cope, sex, gambling, overworking, internet surfing, whatever. Anything to avoid that painful reality. Anything to avoid that. And now when people get down to this far down in the cycle, they're at high risk for starting to practice what I call strategic isolation. They walk into a typical treatment group, a recovery group, a support group, and they can have two possible extreme reactions. On one end of the extreme is, this is a bunch of losers, I don't need to be here. And on the other end, I'm a loser, I don't deserve to be here. The shame, the toxic shame. And when that happens, when I start isolating, it creates a vacuum. And nature abhors a vacuum. So this is where the playgrounds, playmates, and playthings kick in. Enablers, codependents, using people. And now if something really dangerous has happened, my thinking's already messed up. The people I'm hanging with now, their thinking's as bad or worse than mine. I make even worse decisions. I have even more pain and problems. That really gets to the point of turning on the addict brain, and this is where addictive thinking starts to come back in the mix. And it usually starts with a fleeting thought. Wouldn't it be nice if I could? Now, I've been working with nurses, especially in diversion and probation, since the late 80s. And many of the people that have relapsed in that program have shared something interesting with me. They can really, when we do a relapse autopsy, they can remember that they had that thought. Wouldn't it be nice? But no, I'm being monitored. I'll just wait till I get out. And boom. And back into the mix. Because when this addictive thinking returns and it doesn't get talked about, it goes covert, then the person starts setting themselves up for harm's way and moving into what we call high-risk situations, HRS, high-risk situations. These are situations that will tempt the addict brain to, now I have a good reason. And if people stay at that 10 o'clock long enough, they move into loss of control. The last phase of loss of control is option reduction, where they get to the point where they mistakenly believe there's only 3 possibilities left. Number 1, drink or use. I know from past experience that would take the edge off, at least for a little while. If I don't do something, I'm going to collapse. That's door number 2. And door number 3, this is just too hard, I'm going to kill myself. And so when they hit option reduction, 2 of the doors are easier to deal with than the third one. That third door you can't bring people back from. But the other 2 you can. So the last stage is the addictive relapse, whatever it is, target addiction. And what happens though is there's the initial lapse and then there's a progressive relapse. A lot of people in recovery have a very bad mistaken belief that once you start drinking or drugging, you're going to be out of control and life is over. And that is not true. You will hit moments of clarity, moments of sanity where you can stop it right there. Stop it right there. One of the members of my home group, she had 2.5 years and she had a one-night incident of where she was feeling hopeless, despair, grief, and she drank a half bottle of wine. And she shared with me, and she came to one of this same thing, you know, right after this. But she shared with me that she heard in her head she might as well keep going because she screwed up, she lost her recovery. Now people, how many people besides, I've relapsed too. I would have 36.5 years rather than 35.5, except the first year I tried it Steve's way. So I know what the relapse is. Anybody else ever have a relapse in here? Anybody experience a relapse? Yeah. You know, you haven't lost your recovery. You've lost your string of abstinence. Yes, that clock needs to start over, but you haven't lost your recovery. So when I do a relapse autopsy with people, one of the things I want to look for is what were you doing well first? What were the strong points? What was good in your recovery? What happened? So I have a big blank piece of paper with all these bubbles empty, and we go through and recreate the relapse. Sometimes for some people, we start, because they can't figure out where it started, so let's start here. And then let's backtrack. How you went from here all the way over to here. It's a really interesting thing. In the relapse therapy workbook, there's an exercise in there called the recovery relapse calendar, where people get a chance to do that. It's a really great exercise. Because if people don't stop it right away, it only gets worse and people spiral out of control. So that's the relapse cycle. So any questions or comments before we move on? Yes?
What was the second thing of the option reduction, Steve?
Option reduction, number one is drinking or using, of course, chemical. Option two is there's going to be a physical or psychological collapse. I'm going to crack up. And door number three is suicide. So that's the relapse cycle. And with that, I'm going to stop recording and we'll get back to our regularly scheduled program.